The year was 1823, and the rugged northern coast of England bore witness to the restless winds and violent seas of autumn. Waves battered the cliffs with relentless fury, their foam rising like ghostly hands reaching for the heavens, while the cries of distant gulls were carried away by the gales. The very air seemed charged with unease, heavy with the scent of brine and rain. Far from London's glittering ballrooms and candle-lit soirees, the fishing village of Ravenwick crouched beneath the shadow of towering cliffs. Its weathered cottages, their roofs bowed beneath years of salt and storm, seemed to huddle together as though in constant prayer against the tempests that ruled their lives. It was to this desolate corner of the world that Lord Alaric Harrowmont, heir to one of Yorkshire's most venerable estates, had retreated. His sudden departure from the capital had stirred endless whispers. What could drive a man of such wealth, such reputation, from the heart of society in the middle of the season? London tongues, always sharp, had wasted little time in answering. Something must have broken him. And indeed, tragedy clung to him like a second skin. 2 years earlier, his wife, Lady Eleanor, had drowned under mysterious circumstances in the icy waters near Dover. Though the inquest had ruled her death an accident, speculation thrived in the parlours of Mayfair. Some claimed that she had thrown herself into the waves in despair. Others hinted at darker truths, that Alaric's own temper, so quick and unyielding, had driven her to her fate. The truth had been buried with Eleanor beneath stone and soil, leaving behind only shadows, whispers, and a husband haunted by equal parts guilt and suspicion. Now, in Ravenwick, he sought silence. He took residence in a weather-beaten manor perched precariously upon the cliffs, a house long abandoned and once belonging to a distant cousin. Its windows rattled with every gust, and its chimneys sighed like mourners. Alaric lived there in near solitude, his only constant companion the loyal steward, Mr. Alden Shaw, whose presence offered order if not comfort. Yet solitude, for all its cold embrace, could not guard him from the gnawing hollowness within. It was in Ravenwick, beneath skies the colour of slate, that his path crossed with Seraphina Vale. She was a young woman of striking composure, who lived in a modest stone cottage at the edge of the woods, where she tended to her ailing aunt. Life had not been gentle with her. Her father, once a clergyman, had fallen from grace, leaving behind disgrace, poverty, and unanswered questions. When death claimed him, he left his daughter little more than her sharp wit, her unyielding spirit, and a name that society preferred to forget. Seraphina avoided company, shunning the shallow gatherings of local families. She preferred instead the companionship of her books, the sea's eternal song, and her long solitary walks through the moors. There was strength in her solitude, though it was not without its price. One storm-laden evening, fate conspired to set her path against Alaric's. He first beheld her beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, where she sought shelter from the rain. A lantern swung gently in her hand, its glow fighting against the howling dark. The faint light carved her features into an image both soft and defiant, a vision out of some fevered dream. Alaric, a man accustomed to the polished beauties of London, found himself suddenly and disarmingly undone. There was something in her eyes, a light that unsettled him, Not innocence or meek submission, but a quiet defiance, a secret resolve. It was as though she carried a truth she would never surrender, not even under the heaviest of storms. What Alaric could not know was that Seraphina bore her own shadows. Beneath the floorboards of her cottage lay hidden letters, inked with threats, with debts unpaid, with promises that bound her to a past in London she longed to bury. Every line was a chain, every signature a whisper of danger drawing closer with each day. That night, as the sea roared like a living beast below the cliffs, the winds carried with them more than rain. They carried the first stirrings of a story yet to be written, of two fates colliding, of storms within and without, of salvation and ruin intertwined. And though neither Alaric nor Seraphina could yet see it, Ravenwick itself seemed to know, for the sea roared that night not in anger, but in prophecy. Ravenwick thrived on silence, yet silence was never empty. It brimmed with murmurs, of ships lost to the tide, of spirits wandering the cliffs, and of the newcomers whose lives seemed too grand, too tragic to belong in so humble a place. The salty wind carried the scent of the seaweed-laden shores, mingling with the faint, smoky aroma of hearth fires, and the cries of gulls echoed over the jagged cliffs as if the world itself were whispering secrets. By the second week of Lord Alaric Harrowmont's stay, the villagers already whispered of his late wife. At the inn, over mugs of foaming ale, fishermen muttered that a man did not abandon London for the sea without a ghost at his heels. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously toward the manor perched like a sentinel above the cliffs. Women at the market, their baskets heavy with salted cod and fresh herbs, speculated endlessly. Some claimed Lady Eleanor's death had been more than mere misfortune. Others insisted it was the curse of grief that drove her husband to seek solace in isolation. Yet amidst all this gossip, it was Seraphina Vale who found herself most unsettled by his presence. She first encountered him properly when he passed through the village square on horseback, the hooves striking the cobblestones in a steady rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial. He cut a striking figure, dark coat brushed by the autumn wind, tall frame poised, a posture that spoke of dignity tempered by sorrow. His eyes, a shade between stormy grey and muted blue, seemed to hold centuries of unspoken tales, glinting briefly in the weak sunlight that struggled through the overcast sky. "Miss Vale," he greeted her that morning, having learned her name from Mr. Shaw. His voice was measured, refined, yet carried the faintest trace of weariness, like a bell tolling in the distance. She curtsied, though not without hesitation. "My lord," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the chatter of the market and the distant cry of gulls. Their exchange was brief, polite, forgettable in words, yet unforgettable in weight. There was something in the way his gaze lingered on her, not with boldness, but as if he sought recognition of something familiar, ache buried deep within the heart. Her own pulse betrayed her, quickening despite her best effort to remain composed. Throughout the day, she found herself replaying that glance, feeling it tug at her like the undertow beneath Ravenwick's waves. By the time she returned to her cottage, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and the wind rattled the shutters with an urgent insistence. Her aunt slept by the fire, the thin smoke curling lazily into the low ceiling beams. Seraphina settled at the wooden table, her fingers brushing over the familiar grain, seeking comfort. A letter lay unfolded before her, the ink as black as midnight, the handwriting sharp, urgent, and impossibly familiar. You cannot hide forever. The debts are not forgotten, nor are the names. Should you think Ravenwick will protect you, remember, even the sea delivers its dead. The lantern trembled in her hand, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls like restless spirits. She had burned the others, one by one, but this one she could not bring herself to destroy. Her mind raced through memories she had long tried to bury, echoes of cold London streets, the footsteps that followed her at dusk, the voices that promised ruin should she falter. For while the villagers whispered of Lord Alaric's ghost, Seraphina feared hers was still alive, and she knew that no matter how far she ran, the tides of fate had a way of returning those who tried to vanish beneath their weight. Outside, the wind howled, mingling with the roar of the sea, as if the world itself were whispering secrets, that secrets, like waves, always found a way to the shore.
The following days brought rain without mercy. Sheets of water lashed against Ravenwick's windows, the wind shrieking through the narrow streets as though the village itself were crying. The sea below the cliffs roared like some ancient beast chained to the earth, hurling waves against jagged rocks with relentless fury. For most villagers, it was a time to remain indoors, tending fires and sharing murmured tales of loss and misfortune. But for Seraphina, storms had always been a strange comfort. They drowned out the noise of memory, the whispers of creditors, the shadowed corners of London streets, the menacing faces that lingered in her dreams. On stormy days, she could feel the world as it was, raw, untamed, and indifferent, yet honest in its power. One such afternoon she walked the muddy cliff path, boots sinking into the wet earth, the rain mingling with her tangled hair. She bent to gather herbs washed loose by the storm, her fingers brushing the vibrant green leaves glistening with water, when a sudden slip made her heart lurch. A strong hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly. "Careful, Miss Vale," came the deep, measured voice of Lord Alaric, his figure half-shadowed by the mist curling from the sea. She straightened, startled both by his sudden presence and by the steadiness of his touch, which seemed to anchor her amidst the chaos of the storm. "My lord, you startled me." "Forgive me," he said, releasing her reluctantly, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than propriety allowed. "The cliffs are treacherous after the rain. One misstep, and the sea takes what it pleases." His gaze darkened, flickering with some unspoken sorrow, a weight that pressed like the storm clouds above. For a moment, silence held them, punctuated only by the hiss of the wind and the pounding of the surf against the rocks below. Her cloak whipped around her like a living thing, and though her instincts urged her to look away, she could not tear her eyes from his, drawn to the storm in them, as if it mirrored her own. "You walk here often?" he asked, finally, his tone softening. "When the weather allows it. The storms bring things to the shore that the calm never reveals, things lost, things forgotten, sometimes things better left buried." His lips curved, though not quite into a smile, a fleeting shadow of understanding crossing his face. "That is a truth I know well," he murmured, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to shrink, leaving only them, the cliffs, and the raging sea. They descended the path together, careful with each slippery step, speaking little. The storm seemed to grow around them, rain thick and cold, drumming a wild rhythm on the cliffs and on the leaves of the sparse trees clinging to the edge. Soon they reached a secluded cove where the tide had stranded a wrecked fishing boat, its woods splintered and blackened. The wind whistled through its remains, carrying the faint scent of salt and decay. Seraphina knelt to collect sprigs of sea lavender, its delicate fragrance faint against the roar of the ocean. Her fingers paused when something unusual caught her eye. A small, ornate locket, wedged between jagged rocks, gleaming defiantly despite the storm. She bent closer, brushing away sand and grit, feeling the chill of metal bite through her wet gloves. When she opened it, the portrait inside made her breath falter. A woman's face stared back at her, beautiful, severe, undeniably noble. There was a quiet authority in her expression, and yet an undercurrent of sadness that seemed almost alive. Alaric froze, his dark eyes widening, jaw tightening, and hand closing over hers as if to snatch the locket away. "Where did you find this?" His voice was a mixture of command and something raw, something pained. "In the rocks," she answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Why? Do you know her?" For a fleeting second, Alaric's mask slipped. Shadows of grief and anger crossed his faces before he closed the locket and slid it into his coat with practiced speed. "No one you need concern yourself with." But Seraphina knew a lie when she heard one. She had learned, long ago, that the world often spoke in half-truths and veiled threats. Her gaze followed him as he turned, and she felt the cove shift in significance. What had seemed a mere gathering of herbs and wreckage now was charged with secrets, a threshold into a story she had only glimpsed in fragments. Though she could not yet name the woman in the portrait, she understood the truth instinctively. The sea had delivered not mere debris, but a secret that Lord Alaric would rather see drowned forever. The wind howled in response, as if the world itself were warning her. Some truths were not meant to remain buried.
The locket weighed heavy in Seraphina's thoughts long after the storm had passed. Even as the rain ceased and the clouds broke to reveal a pale, reluctant sun, her mind lingered on that fleeting moment. Alaric's sharpness, his sudden need to conceal the portrait, the subtle tremor in his hand. Fear had danced in his eyes, she was certain of it. But fear of what? Of the past? Of her discovery? Or of something far darker? She could not tell. By the week's end, whispers in the village sharpened like the jagged cliffs themselves. At the baker's stall, Seraphina overheard two women speaking in hushed, pointed tones. "They say his lady drowned herself." "No, no. She was pushed. Everyone knows Lord Harrowmont quarrelled with her that night." "Aye, but the courts called it misfortune. Courts listen to coin more than truth." The name Lady Isolde Harrowmont passed their lips like a curse. Beautiful, proud, and, by every account, unhappy in her marriage. Some claimed she had a lover. Others whispered of enemies in high places. All agreed on one fact. Her death had left a stain that no tide or tempest could ever wash away. The villagers glanced at Alaric when he rode past, eyes narrowed, words swallowed in fear or respect. That night, Seraphina sat at her table, the locket resting beside the flickering candle. Her aunt dozed in the chair by the hearth. The warmth of the fire contrasted with the chill that clung to the cottage walls. She tried to dismiss it, to convince herself the locket was none of her concern. Yet her own troubles clawed at her relentlessly. Debts that would never be forgiven, names she dared not speak loud, a past she had sought to leave behind. And now fate had intertwined her path with a man whose secrets rivaled her own. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft, deliberate knock. Startled, she rose, moving cautiously to the door. Standing in the doorway, framed by the dim lantern light in the mist curling from the cliffs, was Mr. Alden Shaw, the loyal steward of Harrowmont Manor. His hat dripped rain onto the floorboards, and his expression was grave, weighted with unspoken concerns. "Miss Vale," he said quietly, his eyes darting to the empty street behind him, as if prying ears lurked in the shadows. "Forgive the hour. But I must ask, when you walked with my lord near the cliffs, did you find anything?" Her heart jolted, yet she kept her voice steady. "Why do you ask, Mr. Shaw?" His gaze lingered on her, steady but pleading, carrying the gravity of a man who had seen more than he dared to speak. "Because whatever you found, it is not safe for you to keep. Some things, Miss Vale, are better left to the sea." Her pulse quickened. Questions surged through her, yet she dared not speak them aloud. The steward's warning hinted at danger, yet it also carried a curious trust, a suggestion that she was now caught in a web she could not unravel alone. Before she could answer, he bowed swiftly, his coat flaring around him as he departed into the misty night, leaving the door swinging on its hinges, and Seraphina with more questions than answers. She pressed the locket to her chest, its cold weight grounding her, yet threatening to drag her deeper into a story not meant for her. For the first time, she wondered if Ravenwick itself was conspiring to keep the past buried. Perhaps the cliffs and the restless tides, the storm-whipped trees and the wind-swept cottages were all guardians of truths too dangerous for ordinary eyes. And perhaps she had just stepped into a tale where curiosity was both a blessing and a curse. A story in which the dead were not silent, the living were not safe, and secrets had a habit of surfacing when least expected. As the candle guttered, shadows danced across the walls, and Seraphina shivered, not from cold, but from the sudden, unnerving awareness that she was no longer merely an observer of Ravenwick's mysteries. She was now entangled in them, and the locket was the key. The knock of Mr. Shaw lingered in Seraphina's mind long after he had departed, but it was another sound that disturbed her sleep that night, the echo of memory, persistent as the tides against the cliffs. She dreamed of London, of candlelit parlours thick with smoke and whispered intrigues, of gentlemen's laughter sharp as knives, of velvet shoes gliding across polished floors while unseen hands plotted ruin. Her father's voice rose in desperate pleas, echoing in her ears as clearly as it had on the day they were cast out. And she saw again Lord Cyril Ashcombe, a man of influence and cruelty whose smile was as smooth as the silk lining his coats, yet as deadly as the debts he left in his wake. Her father's debts had not been of gambling, but of loyalty. He had spoken against Ashcombe's dealings in the church, denouncing corruption where others kept silent. For that, he had been stripped of dignity, of coin, of hope. She remembered her mother's slow decline, the ache of hunger in every room, the endless nights where fear was a tangible weight pressing down on her chest, and above all, she remembered her father's final words before fever took him. "Run, Seraphina. Ravenwick is far enough. They will not follow so far north." But her father had been wrong. The shadows of London had found her, stretching their long fingers even to the distant cliffs of Ravenwick. Days later, Seraphina received another letter. This one bore no signature, only the emblem of a coiled serpent pressed in red wax. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, and the words inside chilled her blood. "We know where you hide. The coast will not keep you safe. The debt is not yours alone. It is your blood's, and blood, Miss Vale, is always collected." Her heart pounded, yet a part of her could not destroy it. Perhaps the warning itself held power, a cruel reassurance that she was being watched, that every step she took in Ravenwick was measured and noted. That evening, the sea was restless, its waves clashing against the cliffs in a violent rhythm. As Seraphina returned from the market, the wind tugged at her cloak, scattering loose hair across her face. Her eyes caught a dark figure by the churchyard gates. Lord Alaric, standing among graves weathered by salt, wind, and the relentless passage of time. His tall frame was rigid, his gaze fixed on the tombstones, yet when he turned, his eyes met hers, sharp and assessing.
"You walk with shadows, Miss Vale," he said, softly, his voice a quiet echo over the churchyard stones. "I see it in you, the way you look beyond people, as if waiting for someone who never appears." The words struck her like a cold wind. She forced herself to composure, replying, "And you, my lord, do you not do the same?" Alaric's jaw tightened, and for a moment she feared she had offended him. But instead of anger, he offered her something far more dangerous: truth. "I lost my wife to the sea," he said, low, as though speaking aloud might summon the ghosts closer. "But some nights, I think it was not the sea that took her. It was the secrets she carried." The air between them grew dense, heavy with unspoken words and shared burdens. For the first time, Seraphina felt drawn to him, not merely by curiosity, but by recognition. Both were prisoners of the past, their lives haunted by shadows that refused to stay buried. A sudden gust of wind scattered leaves around their feet, and Seraphina shivered, not from cold, but from the startling clarity of the connection between them. She felt the pull of something dangerous, something inevitable, yet could not step away. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew it to be true. Secrets never remain buried. They fester, they haunt, and in the end, they have a way of surfacing when least expected, changing everything in their wake. As she turned to leave, Alaric's eyes followed her, lingering on her silhouette as the last light of dusk faded into Ravenwick's encroaching night. And somewhere in the distance, the sea roared, as if mocking the fragility of safety and the certainty of storms, both within and without.
The rains had finally eased, leaving Ravenwick cloaked in a heavy mist that clung to hedgerows and rooftops like a whispered secret. The sea, though calmer, seemed to brood in its vast expanse, as if storing its wrath for another night. Even the gulls seemed subdued, their cries lost in the damp fog. That evening, Seraphina found herself summoned to Harrowmont Manor. Mr. Eldon Shaw had delivered the message personally, his expression a mask she could not read. His words were polite but firm, insisting that Lord Alaric wished to thank her for tending to his steward's injured hand some days prior. Reluctant, yet unable to refuse, she wrapped her cloak tightly and made her way along the cliffside path, her boots slipping occasionally in the damp earth. The manor loomed ahead, a silhouette of stone and shadow against the dim sky, its turrets piercing the clouds. Windows glowed with firelight, but it did little to warm the building's imposing presence. Inside, she was ushered into the drawing room, where the fire's glow danced across walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Alaric stood near the hearth, decanter in hand, his expression unreadable, yet inviting. "Miss Vale," he greeted, his voice low and softening the chill around them. "Forgive the summons. Ravenwick offers little company, and I fear solitude sharpens my ghosts more than I can endure." She inclined her head, her nerves pricking at the weight of his gaze. "I did not think a man such as you, accustomed to London society, would seek company in a place so remote." He poured her a glass of brandy, amber liquid catching the firelight. She hesitated before accepting, unsure whether warmth or danger waited within the glass. He said, "London offers only masks. Here, at least, the silence does not lie." They settled opposite one another, the fire between them casting long shadows that flickered across the room. At first, their conversations skirted the mundane, the storms, the village, the relentless northern winds, but inevitably, their words drifted toward the dark corners of their lives. "You heard the whispers, no doubt, that my wife, Lady Isolde, met her end in the sea. They believe I drove her there. perhaps they are right. The candor startled Seraphina. She felt the heat of the fire, the coldness of the shadows, and the sudden acceleration of her own pulse. She set her glass down, fingers trembling slightly, though she forced her voice steady. "Sometimes," she whispered, "we do not choose the secrets we carry. They choose us, and once chosen, they never release their hold." The silence between them was heavy, alive with unspoken truths, the crackling fire the only sound marking time. Then, without warning, the manor shuddered with a harsh, deliberate sound, 3 hard knocks on the heavy door, echoing through the stone halls like a death knell. Mr. Shaw's voice hurried in the distance as he approached to answer, but it was not his reply that sent a chill crawling down Seraphina's spine. The words of the visitor, sharp and commanding, pierced the room with the weight of inevitability, the unmistakable southern accent cutting through the warmth of firelight. The glass trembled in her hand, slipping and shattering against the cold stone floor. Heart hammering, she looked to Alaric. His jaw tightened, and his dark eyes, normally unreadable, flickered with something she had never seen before: danger, dread, and a shadow of protective fury. The visitor's knock echoed again, insistent, deliberate, as if heralding the storm that had followed them from London all the way to Ravenwick. Seraphina felt the weight of her past pressing into the present, every secret, every debt, every hidden truth converging in that room under firelight. And in that moment, she knew the calm of Ravenwick had been a lie. The past had come to claim them both, and nothing, neither the cliffs, the sea, nor the manor, could keep it at bay. The sound of the stranger's voice had cut through the corridors like a sudden gust of icy wind, rattling the old manor in a way that made even the fire tremble. Seraphina's pulse hammered violently against her ribs as she rose instinctively, body torn between flight and frozen terror. Each step of the newcomer echoed ominously along the stone floor. Lord Alaric moved first, the authority in his stance as sharp as the northern winds outside. His dark eyes, usually measured and unreadable, now glimmered with controlled menace. He gestured for her to remain seated. "Stay," he murmured, low but firm, the single word carrying the weight of command and protection. From the hall came the scrape of damp boots and Mr. Shaw's steady, tense voice. The door to the drawing-room creaked open, revealing the intruder in full. A tall man entered, dripping from the mist-laden air, his dark traveling coat clinging to his frame. Gloved hands gripped a hat he refused to remove, fingers tightening ever so slightly, as though it were a talisman. His face was sharply chiseled, hawk-like, and his eyes glimmered with the kind of cold confidence cultivated only by men accustomed to control and cruelty. "Lord Harrowmont," he said smoothly, voice layered with charm yet edged with menace. He offered a bow so shallow it seemed more mockery than respect. "Forgive the intrusion at such an hour. My journey from London was long, and I thought it best not to waste daylight when matters of importance are at hand." Alaric's gaze, dark and unyielding, met the stranger's. "And whom do I have the displeasure of addressing?" The stranger's smile thinned, sharp as a knife's edge. "Mr. Damien Crowther, an associate of certain circles in London. I believe the name may ring a bell." Seraphina's stomach twisted violently. Crowther. The name had haunted her father's last days, whispered in fear, a man who dealt not merely in money, but in secrets, favors, and ruin, his reputation a storm that had followed her even to the remote cliffs of Ravenwick. Crowther's gaze flicked deliberately to her, measuring in cold. "And you must be Miss Vale. I was told you would be here. The sea does little to conceal those it shelters." Her throat tightened, yet she lifted her chin, unwilling to show weakness.
You seem very well informed for a stranger." He chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. "It is my profession to be informed." His eyes lingered on her with a curiosity that made her shiver, then returned to Alaric. Alaric stepped closer, the air around him thickening with authority and restrained fury. "You've delivered your introduction, sir. Now state your business plainly, or take it back to London with you." Crowther's eyes met hers once last, sharp, deliberate, as though imprinting a warning on her very soul. "In time, my lord, but know this, debts unpaid in London rarely remain there. They have a way of finding their way to new shores." The fire crackled, casting jagged shadows across the room. Shah shifted uneasily in the doorway, hands tightening on the edge of the frame as though bracing for conflict. With a bow that was more mockery than courtesy, Crowther excused himself for the night. Each step he took reverberated through the manor, leaving behind a sense of impending dread, a promise that Ravenwick's fragile peace had been shattered, and that both Seraphina and Alaric were ensnared in the web he wove. As the heavy door closed, sealing the room from the misted night outside, Alaric turned to Seraphina, jaw set tight, eyes shadowed with fury and concern. "Tell me the truth, Miss Vale. Who is that man to you?" Her lips parted, but the words faltered, trapped in her throat. How could she confess that the storm Crowther carried was one she had helped summon in London? That her past was a debt owed not just to money or men, but to the ghosts of a life she had tried to bury? Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating, the fire flickering like a heartbeat in the room, while beyond the windows the sea roared softly, as though in grim approval.
The morning fog lay thick over Ravenwick, curling around the turrets like ghostly fingers that reached into every corner of the manor. Seraphina walked along the terrace, her boots muffled by the dew-soaked stones, thoughts tangled with last night's visitor. Damien Crowther's presence lingered like a shadow that stretched longer with the rising sun, as if the mist itself carried his threat. Alaric approached silently, the quiet strength of his step grounding her. He did not speak at once, letting the wind target his dark coat and scatter the fog around them. Finally, his voice cut through the mist, calm but edged with gravity. "He is not merely a stranger, Seraphina. That man, Crowther, he tracks debts, yes, but he also collects truths people would rather bury." Seraphina shivered, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Truths? You mean about my father?" Alaric's gaze softened momentarily, though the lines of his jaw remained firm, hardened by grief and experience. "Yes, and yours too. Whatever secrets were kept in London, Crowther seems determined to ensure they do not remain buried. He has a way of surfacing them at the most inconvenient hours." The words hung heavy in the salt-thick air. Seraphina swallowed, a chill crawling down her spine. The wind carried the faint sound of the sea striking the cliffs below, its rhythm relentless, as though echoing the inevitability of Crowther's pursuit. A sudden knock echoed through the terrace doors, sharp and deliberate. Shah appeared, bowing slightly as he handed her a folded letter, the edges frayed as if it had been carried across storms and shadows. "Miss Vale," he said, voice low and measured. "This arrived this morning. No sender, only the seal, a black raven in flight." Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax. Inside, a single sentence was scrawled in precise, deliberate handwriting. "Not all debts are paid in coin. Some are paid in blood, some in silence, and some in choice. Choose wisely." Her breath caught. The parchment seemed to burn against her palm, the weight of its words pressing into her very bones. Memories of London, the whispered deals, the veiled threats, her father's desperate pleas, rose unbidden,
filling the terrace with ghosts she had thought long buried. Alaric's eyes narrowed, dark with concern and anger. A warning, or a summons. He wants to see what you will do, how far he can push. Seraphina pressed the letter to her chest, her mind racing. Alaric, she whispered, voice trembling. What if he knows everything? What if he knows the debts, the secrets, even me? He took her hand in both of his, firm, protective, yet carrying an unspoken acknowledgment of the danger that shadowed them. Then we make sure he learns nothing more than he must. Ravenwick may be isolated, but its walls do not just shelter us, they guard us, and we will guard one another. Even as he spoke, a distant caw echoed across the terrace. The blackbird's cry cut through the fog, a grim herald of the past stalking them into this quiet coastal estate. Seraphina's heart clenched. London was not behind her. It had arrived, and Crother's shadow would not rest until every secret was unearthed. She glanced at Alaric, and for a fleeting moment their eyes met, not with fear, but with an unspoken promise. Whatever came, they would face it together. But the letter's words lingered. Some debts were not for coin, and some choices were not truly theirs. And outside, the fog thickened, carrying with it whispers of the past, echoes of London, echoes of danger, and echoes of truths long buried that were now clawing their way to the surface.
That evening, the wind howled against the windows of Ravenwick Manor, rattling the panes and sending shivers through the stone corridors. The scent of salt and seaweed crept through the cracks, carrying with it an almost tangible sense of foreboding. Seraphina sat by the hearth, her embroidery abandoned, threads slipping through her fingers as her mind wandered to the letter. Its warning echoed relentlessly in every corner of the estate, a sinister rhythm that refused to be ignored. Alaric, moving silently across the drawing room, noted her agitation. "You should rest," he said, his voice low, measured, yet carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Your mind cannot face shadows when weary." Seraphina shook her head, her dark eyes glinting with unease. "I cannot rest, not with him here, not with what he knows." Her fingers brushed the black raven embossed on the wax seal, its raised form cold and menacing. Memories of her father surged unbidden, his stern gaze, his whispered warnings, the sense of always being watched. London had been more than a city. It had been a cage of whispers, debts, and choices that were never truly hers. The next day, seeking distraction, she wandered the library, a vast chamber lined with leather-bound tomes, ancient maps, and the faint, lingering scent of old ink and dust. She ran her hand along a shelf she had never examined closely before. Behind a row of worn journals, a subtle gap revealed a small, hidden compartment. Within it lay a silver locket, heavy and cold to the touch. Seraphina opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a miniature painting of a man with eyes dark, calculating and intense, stared back at her. Her breath caught. She had never seen this man before, yet the locket felt disturbingly familiar, as if some buried memory was brushing against her mind. Alaric appeared behind her, his gaze piercing. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice carrying a dangerous undertone, equal parts caution and command. I don't know. It was hidden," she admitted, her voice quivering. "But this man, I feel as if I know him, and yet I cannot place him." Alaric's expression darkened, shadows crossing his sharp features. "Seraphina, whatever your father kept from you, it is tied to Crowther. That locket, it is a symbol, not merely a trinket. Symbols endure, even when names fade, and Crowther, he remembers them all. Before she could speak, the manor doors slammed open with a force that made the windows rattle. Shaw burst in, breathless, clutching another note, this one lacking the anonymity of the first. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, deliberate, and cold as frost. Some truths will demand more than courage. Some will demand sacrifice. Choose your allies carefully. Seraphina's heart hammered in her chest. She felt the manor's walls close in, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that seemed alive, stretching toward her like silent witnesses. London's shadows were not content to remain behind. They had followed her here, seeping into every corner of Ravenwick. Alaric stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as he spoke, voice firm and unyielding. We must tread carefully. Crowther is not a man to be underestimated. Every move he makes is calculated, every whisper deliberate. He will test us, tempt us, and force our secrets into the light. Seraphina swallowed, the weight of his words pressing upon her like the storm clouds gathering over the cliffs. She realized that Crowther was no longer merely a visitor. He was a force, weaving a net of secrets and danger that threatened to ensnare her very life. And in the heart of Ravenwick, far from London's familiar streets, she and Alaric would have to face him together or risk being consumed by shadows too dark to escape. As night fell, the wind outside carried with it a single haunting call, the black raven, a living omen. Seraphina pressed the letter to her chest, understanding at last that the past she thought she had fled had followed her across miles of stormy coast, and that the only way to survive was to confront it, with Alaric by her side, or be lost to the shadows forever.
The dawn broke cold over Ravenwick Manor, mist curling around the gardens like ghostly fingers. Seraphina had not slept, the locket pressed heavy in her pocket, carrying the weight of unspoken truths. Alaric found her in the courtyard, his presence steady and reassuring. "You must eat," he urged softly, though the gravity in his eyes betrayed unease. Choices must be made with clear thought. Before she could answer, Crowther emerged from the fog, his dark coat slick with rain. "You found it," he said, nodding toward the locket. "More than your father ever intended." "Who is he?" Seraphina asked, voice trembling. "He is the man who saved your family from ruin, and the man your father wished you to forget." Confusion and awe clashed within her. Why hide it? Why hide him? "Some truths are dangerous," Crowther said. "Your father's enemies linger even now. The locket and its secret were meant to protect you, but now the past has followed you to Ravenwick." Alaric stepped closer, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Fear cannot bind us, Seraphina. Only courage can." The three stood in tense silence, the cliffs below roaring, the fog thickening. Then Crowther exhaled, his expression softening. "I will leave Ravenwick. The truth has been revealed. Your father's legacy is safe once more. The enemies who sought to harm you know nothing of what lies here." Seraphina blinked, the weight in her chest easing. "And you, will you stay away?" "I will watch from afar," Crowther replied, "only until you are ready to face the world without fear." As Crowther turned, fading into the mist, Alaric took her hand. "Ravenwick has been tested," he said softly, "but so have we. Secrets may unearth themselves, debts may call, and storms may come, but we endure. Seraphina squeezed his hand, a quiet smile breaking through her tension. "And together?" "Together," he confirmed, his gaze holding hers, unwavering against the rising sun. The fog lifted further, revealing the jagged cliffs and the endless northern sea. For the first time in months, Seraphina felt a measure of peace. The past would always linger, but in Alaric she found not only a protector, but a kindred soul, someone who understood the burdens of secrets and the cost of survival. And so, amidst the mist and the roar of the sea, two hearts bound by shadows and revelation found a fragile but enduring hope, a promise that even in a world of secrets, love could anchor them, guiding them through whatever storms lay ahead.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. Want to see the continuation of this story? Comment below and let us know what you think. Your opinion makes all the difference.